Alright, you guys can moan and complain all you want about this, but regardless, I'm going to start this video off with a mainstream history lesson. Specifically, what is natural selection? Natural selection is a mechanism of evolution. Organisms that are more adapted to their environment are more likely to survive and pass on the genes that aided their success. This process causes species to change and diverge over time. Natural selection is one of the ways to account for the millions of species that have lived on Earth. Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace are jointly credited with coming up with the theory of evolution by natural selection, having co-published on it in 1858. Darwin has generally overshadowed Wallace since the publication of On the Origin of Species in 1859, however. It's really interesting looking at the year that this transpired. 1859, in the grand scheme of things, isn't that long ago. It's less than 200 years that this theory of how human beings became the dominant narrative that everyone subscribes to. This is what is taught in every school around the world. Accordingly, it forms the basis of everything that we believe. In Darwin and Wallace's time, most believed that organisms were too complex to have natural origins and must have been designed by a transcendent God. Natural selection, however, states that even the most complex organisms occur by totally natural processes. This is clearly removing God from the equation, which is why education is so tailored to a secular mindset that removes any kind of religious understanding from it. And indeed, in tandem with the theory of evolution, we had the corruption of religion and the way that the media began to portray what religion is and how religious people behave and what they believe as it related to the rest of society. In other words, they painted them as being very backwards and behind the times. And on the flip side, science is portrayed as at the forefront, the cutting edge. Okay, that's the end of the mainstream history lesson for today, so you guys can all breathe a deep sigh of relief, and we will move on to more interesting topics, at least to me anyway. And specifically, we're going to look at this video again. Is aging a disease? Evolution, B12, vitamin C, D, thymus, telomeres, childbirth. And as I play this clip, for those of you who have not yet seen this video, we're going to see an example of a paradox where the mainstream theory of evolution, viewed through the lens of natural selection, does not fit with something that actually transpired in our evolution. That explanation doesn't quite explain what happened to us using its own terms and conditions. And before speaking on it further myself, I'll just play this clip for you.
For reasons unknown, our brain underwent this extraordinary hyperinflation, and we added an entire pound of brain tissue. We went from a 2-pound brain to a 3-pound brain in a very short period of time.
Obviously, this is a huge evolutionary event in the history of human beings. Out of nowhere, our brains went from 2 pounds to 3 pounds. That's a full pound increase in weight and size that transpired. The natural selection evolutionary explanation for this would be some kind of natural occurrence that transpired for whatever reason. In some way, it served us in our environment, and it was a better way for us to ensure our survival, to undergo this transformation. But as I play the rest of this, you will begin to see the problem with that as this professor goes on to explain what this change in our brains entailed as it relates to childbirth.
Now, on your right, you see a gorilla pelvis. She weighs 200 pounds. She delivers a 3-pound infant. On your left, you see a human female who weighs 100 pounds. She delivers a 7-pound infant. This is a problem. The human female began to deliver the largest brain baby in all of animaldom. Any woman who's birthed a baby knows that the mismatch between the size of the baby's head and the diameter of the birth canal is such a mismatch that it produces a lot of problems delivering birth. There was recently an article in the New York Times that 20% of the women in sub-Saharan Africa are dying in childbirth. So evolution, to solve this problem, and first it tried to solve it by getting around by coming up with these clever sleights of hand that thread the baby's head to the eye of the mother's birth canal. And then a catastrophe occurred. Women started to die in childbirth. I want you to think about this for a minute. There's no other animals where women die the females die in childbirth. I mean, humans have the highest female mortality rate delivering babies of any other species.
Okay, so hopefully you can see the paradox there, where we have this transcendent, hugely impactful change in the size of our brains, where they go from 2 pounds to 3 pounds, and in terms of the theory of evolution, this is very beneficial somehow to our survival. Yet at the very same time, that change in the size of our brains resulted in the females giving birth to babies dying during childbirth. So again, think of this, logically speaking. It doesn't make any sense from a natural selection point of view, from a survival of the fittest point of view, for an evolutionary change to result in danger to the females giving birth, to the perpetuation of the species, right? This is a change that is putting in danger the future of the species itself if the women aren't able to push out these giant heads without the risk of dying themselves. And I don't know if it's 100% accurate what this professor states in the video, that there are no other females in nature on planet Earth who die during childbirth like human beings are capable of doing. I don't know if that's 100% true, but we'll take him at his word and just assume that's mostly true. It's a very interesting question, right? Why would we undergo this process of evolution naturally when it endangered the survival of our species? Now, maybe you could go with an argument along the lines of, well, the females who were able to survive this would produce smarter children, and in the long run, that would be worth the risk to the species, in the sense that the strongest female bodies would survive the birthing process and it would refine us as a species in that way. I suppose that would probably be something they might go with as an explanation in terms of natural selection and evolution. And that's entirely possible. I don't know. I'm not an expert on these things. I just want to entertain a different possibility, just for the sake of a thought experiment. Let's just imagine what else is potentially possible here. And along those lines, I want to read this article that I missed the first time around when I did the video that I just had on the screen. Scientists grew bigger monkey brains with a human gene. Researchers have replicated the evolutionary moment that set humans apart from other primates. Our big brains set us apart from other primates. Why we have these impressive crania may come down to a specific gene, according to new research. For the first time, that gene has shown the same brain-enlarging effect in a non-human primate. Researchers in Germany and Japan introduced a human-specific gene to the fetuses of common marmosets. In turn, that gene displayed at typical human levels caused the monkey's brains to grow larger than usual. This extraordinary finding was published Thursday in the journal Science. This is from 2020, by the way. Inserting the gene increased size of the monkey's neocortex, induced folding of the brain similar to how a human brain is folded, increased the relevant progenerative cell type which produces neurons, specifically increased upper layer neurons, which are the neurons that increase during evolution. Essentially, the gene did everything in the marmoset fetus that you might expect an evolutionarily important gene to do. It's as if the researchers recreated the same evolution that happened in the brains of ancient Homo sapiens. That genetic evolution, researchers believe, is part of the basis for the brains we have today. And here is the picture of what the scientists were able to do to the marmoset brain. Clearly, they were able to increase the size of the brain in a dramatic fashion by inserting this human gene into it. So let me read this sentence again. It's as if the researchers recreated the same evolution that happened in the brains of ancient Homo sapiens. And hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, which is it possible that we are viewing this through our lens as a recreation of natural evolution, while at the same time something else, some other intelligence, inserted this gene into our brains many, many, many centuries ago, which resulted in that great increase in the size of the human brain, which we now attribute as being something that naturally happened as a form of some part of evolution in our species. If scientists now are capable of doing this, and they are letting us know about this, well, has it always been possible? Is there some kind of intelligence behind the scenes that would be capable of doing something like this? And if that's the case, it would sort of explain why we are so far behind whatever it is that is in control here. And it would also explain why it tends to view us as cattle, as things that deserve to be controlled and exploited and taken advantage of in every way possible. It views us as its slaves in that way. This context would make that very plausible in terms of why things are the way they are on this planet currently. I'm not saying that's what it is. This is just an interesting thought experiment that is an explanation different from what is conventionally referred to as natural selection and evolution. Because remember, this change in the human brain put our species at risk in terms of women and their ability to survive childbirth. And in this context, it's so interesting because you can see how someone would say something like, viruses are nanotechnology. Meaning, if there is an intelligence that has the ability to implant genes into certain sequences that would result in a primate's brain growing in size, allowing them to become more intelligent, smarter, etc., well, clearly something on that level of sophistication would likewise be able to tinker genetically with all kinds of other technologies that we don't yet understand. To the point where it could insert certain viruses out in the wild and we would view it as a natural occurrence, unaware that it was something attempting to tinker with our body's abilities in certain ways. So yeah, that's really all I wanted to get into. If you haven't seen this video and what I'm saying isn't making sense, go back and listen to it, and I promise you it'll make a lot more sense having this background and going into this article on researchers recreating the same quote-unquote evolution that happened in the brains of ancient Homo sapiens, thus presenting the question, hey, was it natural evolution that transpired in ancient Homo sapiens, or was it a similar genetic tinkering event like what scientists now are proving they are able to do with the same gene? And again, let me say for the record, I'm not saying this is what it is, but in the context of the thought experiment we're having here, if some kind of very sophisticated intelligence was capable of upgrading the neocortex of ancient Homo sapien brains to turn them into what they are today, the theory of evolution would be its alibi. You see, that's the most important point here. In that context, evolution is an alibi where they say, oh, hey, look, this all happened naturally. There was nothing else occurring. No transcendent God, no influence of any kind. This stuff just happens out in nature, so don't worry about it. There's nothing you can do, right? That would be its alibi in that scenario. In other words, it wasn't the gene itself that was a natural growth out of evolution. No, that gene was implanted into our brains way back in the day. And now we are identifying that gene and implanting it into another primate. It's kind of like all those 13th floor ideas with artificial intelligence, where the creations start becoming creators in that way. And I think that's the type of thing that gets wiped out by floods at some point along the way. So we'll see what happens in the future. But in the meantime, try to enjoy your time alive as best you can. Anyways, that's it for now. Later.